You still on the people's side, have no doubt. Bless those who have been given the great responsibility of government. Bless all those who work in this chamber. During this session, be done and for your greater honor and glory. Lord God, what we know not, we have not, give us. We are not. Jesus Christ. The Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses. We forgive those that trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever.
This House is in session. I wish to acknowledge the presence of the families of Mr. Joseph Tudor, Mr. Ezra Aline, and the Reverend Canon Ivan Herod. I also wish to welcome to these hallowed chambers the Student Council of Combermere School and the teacher. I do not want to be biased at this stage, but this is an extra special welcome to those students from the University of Waterford and the greatest educational institution in this country. I hope that you will enjoy your time here. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, January 24th, 2023 to be confirmed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
Seconder, please. Can I have a seconder, please?
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are confirmed.
Messages from Her Excellency the President.
I am in receipt of a message from the President dated 3rd February 2023. Dear Mr. Speaker, I shall be away from the island on duty leave during the period 3rd to 5th February 2023. In accordance with the provisions of Section 33 of the Constitution, the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Douglas Gibson will perform the functions of the office of the President during my absence. As the Honourable, the House of Assembly will not be meeting prior to my departure, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you therefore please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honourable, the House of Assembly when next it meets. Yours faithfully, President.
Petitions, papers.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm commanded to lay the audited financial statements of the Barbados Tourism Product Authority for the years 2015 to 2020.
Government notices. Private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first reading of bills.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
I'd like to move the first reading of the Minor Offences Amendment Bill 2023. I further beg to move the first reading of the Integrity and Public Life Bill 2023. I beg to move as well, sir, the first reading of the Value Added Tax Amendment Bill of 2023.
Questions that the three aforementioned bills be read the first time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers. Congratulatory and obituary speeches.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise this morning to pay tribute to three distinguished gentlemen, Dr. Joseph Johnny Tudor, Mr. Ezra Aline, and the Reverend Canon Ivan Herwood. The first two, as this chamber is well aware, were former members of Parliament, and the latter is also deemed deserving of a special tribute as well. That is the Reverend Canon Herwood, because he would have been the chaplain of Parliament for over 30 years, giving distinguished service to this House. Allow me at the outset, though, to welcome and to acknowledge the families and friends of these individuals. In our presence, we have Mrs. Rosanna Tudor, the wife of the late Joe Tudor. We also have Joanne Tudor, his daughter, Jay Tudor, a relative, Mr. Charles Lewis, a close friend, and attending virtually is also Simone and Dominique, the daughters of Johnny Tudor. Also in our presence is Mrs. Tassia Bryan Aline, who is the wife of the late Ezra Aline, along with his son Nathan. Also in our presence is Miss Gail Aline, the daughter of Ezra. Our close friend, Justice William Chandler, is also present with us, along with Brent Chandler, a friend, Clorinda Aline, his sister, as well as Theodore Aline, another sister, and I understand that Alistair Aline, another son, is attending virtually this morning's session. Also in our presence is the Reverend Mark Herwood, who is also the current chaplain for the host, and that is the son of Reverend Canon Ivan Herwood, along with Miss Herwood, who is the granddaughter of the Reverend as well. What's her mom's mom? And Adele Herwood, sorry, is also, his wife is also present with us this morning as well. Before I begin, though, let me take the opportunity to welcome the students of the Student Council of the Commonwealth School and to encourage them this morning to recognize that Parliament is a lot more than just speaking about and introducing laws into Parliament, but also there are other aspects where we take and pay particular attention to recognizing the contribution of those who have given a life of service in this chamber. And therefore, despite the fact that I think many of you would be aware that with the directives in relation to COVID and the restrictions, we would not have been able to do the tributes in the timely manner in which we are accustomed in the last few years. And therefore, we have had to obviously wait until those restrictions had been lifted to accommodate families and friends of the deceased in order to be able to participate in these types of tributes in the last few weeks. And therefore, I thank the families for being patient, for their understanding, and certainly being able to join us both in person today and certainly virtually. I propose, as I did on the last occasion, to introduce the tributes of each of the individuals this morning. starting first of all with the Reverend Dr. Joseph Johnny Tudor, who was born on November 3rd of 1948 and would have left this earth on the 25th of May of 2022 at the age of 73. He was the son of a late Barbadian actor, radio host, comedian, and entertainment promoter who went by the name of Joe Tudor, and also his mother was called Beverly. He was educated at the Abbey Preparatory School, which I'm told that the Honourable Minister of Infrastructure also attended, Honourable member in this chamber, and I'm sure, I don't know if they had the opportunity to interact when they were of a young age, but he also would have attended the Abbey Preparatory School. Johnny later went on to the Combermere School and then later pursued studies at the School of Business at the University of the West Indies. In relation to his career in politics, he would have aligned himself with the Democratic Labour Party and was successful in securing 2 terms in Parliament representing the constituency of St. Michael East from the period 1991 until 1999. In the 1991 election, Johnny Tudor was victorious against the then Barbados Labour Party, securing 2,101 votes to the Barbados Labour Party's candidate Jessica Odell at the time, who secured 1,230. And the current member for St. Michael's East, who was then running on the NDP ticket, the National Democratic Party's ticket, would have secured 802. I mentioned that to the chamber because what is interesting is that by 1999, the Honourable member, current sitting member for St. Michael East, was then running on a Barbados Labour Party ticket and was able to secure 2,645 votes to Tudor's 1,778, thereby not only reversing his majority, but also gaining a couple hundred votes on top of that. And I think that it is quite interesting because I know that Mr. Tudor would obviously have replaced Dr. Don Blackman, who we will pay tribute to in another week or two. And that constituency obviously has benefited from very fearless leadership. Dr. Don Blackman is well known in that constituency, so is the current sitting MP. And Mr. Johnny Tudor was also well known for being a defender of the poor and the most vulnerable in our society. Perhaps he was best known for his work with persons with disabilities, both before Parliament and certainly while he was in Parliament as well. He continued to support the cause to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. He was commended for bringing to Barbados the first disabled bus. This was spearheaded by him, and because of his influence and contacts within the automobile industry, he was able to ensure that assistance was provided, which I believe has now catapulted not only a keen interest in this area, but obviously we've seen the concessions granted by government as well and other private sector entities being able to assist persons with disabilities. And for that, I think this Parliament and certainly the people of Barbados and the entire disability community are certainly grateful for the foresight which he had and the fact that he led the charge not just in Parliament, but he also continued his efforts to support persons with disabilities outside of these hallowed walls. He received an Independence Honour in 2020, which was the Silver Crown of Merit, for this service and contribution to the Barbados Council for the Disabled and his support that he'd given to persons with disabilities. And that was really, I think, a signal moment in his career as well, because there's no greater thing that can be done than when a country actually stands and recognizes a person for a contribution in a particular area. Many of us come to public life. Some will leave public life having been varied in our interests. Others will be very singular in their focus in terms of their fight for particular things or becoming known for particular things. And I think that what many people remember about Johnny Tudor is the fact that he fought for the persons who were most vulnerable, but in particular for persons who were also within the disabled community. But he was more than just an advocate for the vulnerable. He had a stint at the Samuel Jackman Prescott then Polytechnic, now Institute. He was a chairman, and during his tenure there, he was credited as having engineered the online learning, which has now become commonplace today for a number of students attending that particular institution. He also had a stint as the chairman of the Government Industrial School, and I'm sure that if he were here today, he would be pleased with the progress that we have started to make in that area in terms of the several reforms that are being introduced to ensure that, again, that vulnerable group who has to attend that institution is properly catered for within our society. He also played another significant role, and quite apart from being known as for his contribution with the disabled community, he has been credited during his time on the Barbados Board of Tourism, which was then the Barbados Board of Tourism, when he was the chairman, as the individual who was credited for the slogan, "Tourism is our business, let's play our part." And I think every child growing up in the 80s and 90s, certainly that slogan became ingrained in the minds of all of us, that tourism was our business and that we had a responsibility to play our part. He was part of the marketing committee, the PR committee, and therefore I think that he obviously had a good sense of what was necessary for us as a people to not just make sure that we improve Barbados for Barbadians, but that we appreciated that how we generated revenue obviously came in large measure from the way we treated tourists as well. And therefore, it was our business to make sure that we were playing our part in how we spoke to people when they arrived on island, how we delivered our services to individuals when they came to be offered a service, and generally how we interacted as locals around the tourism product. And I think that, again, that is the other area that he will perhaps best be remembered for in terms of his contribution throughout his entire career. He was also active in job creation through his leadership roles in Caribbean Airways Limited, the Barbados Board of Tourism, and also Joseph Tudor Enterprises, because he was also an entrepreneur as well. He was also a leader in such organizations as the Barbados Workers Union, part of the trade union movement, and also the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and the Barbados Cricket Association. But regardless of the position which the Reverend Johnny Tudor held, it didn't matter. It was clear that he was, again, fighting for the interests of the poor, the underprivileged, and the most vulnerable. In his latter years, and perhaps those who are a little bit younger in this chamber may recall him in his capacity as an astute businessman who was holding the position of the group brand manager for BMW and Mini with the McInerney Quality Inc. I certainly, back in my days in entertainment, interacted with him quite a bit because during the crop over season, I would often have to go to McInerney where they were giving away a car for one of the Calypsonians. And just as he was cordial when I interacted and engaged with him as a child growing up in the political arena, he was equally accommodating in that sphere as well as business. The thing about Mr. Tudor was that you knew where he stood. You didn't have to ask him what was on his mind. You knew what was on his mind, you knew where he stood and the positions that he took. But he was also very likable. And even both in and out of politics, I think that has been the common thread when you speak to people. People liked Johnny Tudor. They just liked him. And that, I think, speaks volumes, because in politics, a lot of people may be critical of you from time to time, but I always believe that you have to behave in politics as though you will at some point be out of politics, and therefore be able to live and walk around in Barbados and to be able to exist in your country without all of the titles and all of the things that are associated with political life. And I think that Johnny represented that in terms of his ability to cross over the political divide and to have friends on both sides. But also, I mean, he was not afraid when he was asked a couple of years ago about our current Prime Minister, how he felt about her tenure in public life. And he was very supportive, regardless of the fact that he did not start out supporting the Barbados Labour Party. He was very clear in his support for her stewardship and her leadership of the country. And again, did not mince words in terms of where he stood. If he stood for a particular position, he let it be known that that is where he stood, and he was going to stand by those words regardless of what others thought of him. I found it interesting, though, that when he left political life, and obviously he was involved in the automobile business, that he also, in 2016, became ordained as a minister with the Signs and Wonders International Ministries, which is a Pentecostal church. And I say interesting because obviously he had an experience within his life which led him to God. I can certainly relate, not that it took that for me to turn to God, but I can relate that there are sometimes in life things that change you and change your perspective on life. And I note that having suffered a heart attack, he commented when he was interviewed by the media, that he had been stripped of his BMW, his keys to his car. He had been stripped of his jewelry. He had been stripped of everything. And he was pretty much, obviously, at the mercy of the doctors and those that were attending to him. And it was there that he decided that he would turn his life to God and that he would help to bring other people to a life of service through the church as well. And I think that is interesting because his passion did not just end with politics. It actually extended to helping people to have a closer relationship with the Lord as well. And I think that that is also to be commended. It never stopped him from, indicating where he stood as far as going to church and certainly doing the things that he did. He accepted quite openly that he wasn't always an angel. He didn't always do the right thing. And he was therefore not a hypocrite in the context that he was trying to pretend that he was something that he wasn't. But he had a life-changing experience, and with that came obviously a different outlook on life, which led him to recognize that there was more to this life than sometimes what we get caught up in. And therefore, I think that speaks volumes in terms of that recognition that he obviously came to in his latter days of life. Now, he was the father of 5 children: Simone, Jason, Dominic, Shari, and Joseph Jr. And I recall at the funeral having a conversation with the children because every time I speak in these types of moments, I always remind people that children of politicians are a very special breed. They can choose to do one of 2 things: either get immersed in politics or run as far away from politics as possible. But what came across when I spoke to them was the love for their father, and certainly the father's love for them as well. And sometimes we forget that politicians are husbands, they are fathers, they are brothers, they are sisters, and that they do have a personal life outside of the political sphere. And I think it is important that, as we pay tribute to all of these individuals today, that is often, something that we miss, but something that has to be remembered, that when they give of a life of service to the public, that at the end of the day, they also have to go home and to be of service to their families as well. And sometimes it is not an easy road, especially if there is public criticism that is coming at you. Sometimes your children and your wives get caught up in the entanglement of public life, which is why a lot of people tend not to come into public life as well. But I've encouraged them and will continue to encourage all, even my own colleagues as well, who have children, while they are in public life, to do what Johnny Tudor did as well, to make sure that the children also understand that you can grow up and you can have everything, but the true gift is also in giving and in serving and in helping others. And I think that as we give these speeches in this chamber, I think that has to be the takeaway continuously, that our life is really one of service, whether to people, whether to God, and just generally to others as well, and that we must never forget that and keep that forefront in our minds as we go about our business. So I want to, on behalf of this chamber, certainly say a special thank you to the family in particular for lending him to us. Thank him on behalf of the disabilities community and certainly all of the vulnerable groups and the people of St. Michael East for the service that he would have given, and certainly on behalf of the Democratic Labour Party, whom he served, during his time that he was a member with them. And to say to the family that while he is gone, and we know that the road ahead may seem a bit daunting at times, that you can be assured that this chamber fully recognizes the contribution that Johnny Trudeau would have made to the political landscape of this country, and we want to say a special thank you on behalf of the people of Barbados. I therefore want to next move on to Ezra Allen, who would have died on the 10th of July of 2022 at the age of 78. He was the son of Ruby and Victor Allen, the husband of Tassia Brian Allen, and the father of 4 children, Gail, Dawn, Alistair, and Nathan. And let me just say, I had many long conversations with Ezra when I was an attorney, and I know that young Nathan preoccupied a lot of his attention in those early days. He's with us here today, and it's such a pleasure to actually see him in the flesh, because I found that Ezra was extremely preoccupied with this baby at the time, as he was. I was on the exit of my legal career, but he was, in our interactions, he was very engaged and very dedicated and committed to young Nathan. And I hope that today, as I speak about him and others speak about him, that in particular Nathan, because the others are all older, the other children are older, but in particular Nathan is able to remember this day and to take away from this how important his father was in the political landscape of this island. Ezra was educated at the St. Stephen's Boys' School, and then of course he went on to Commermere. I don't know if the Commermerian students got wind of this session this morning and deliberately decided to show their faces in support with others in the chamber. But yes, he was a member of the student of the Commermere School. And again, I think Commermere, as well as all of us, ought to be proud of the contribution that he made, not just to the political landscape, but also to the legal fraternity as well. He attended the Holborn College of Law and the Queen's Mary College in the UK. He also attained his LLB and LLM at the University of London. And like many during that time, he was called to the Bar of England and attended one of the inns, and in that time he had attended the Middle Temple. A little known fact, though, is that Ezra placed first among 3,000 external students in the intermediate LLB and program and won the London University Convocation Prize. The following year, he won the Sir John Johnson Scholarship for the best performance of any student in his first year at the Queen's Mary's College. It was while in London in the early 1960s that he then became a clerk with a firm called Lincoln & Lincoln Solicitors, and whilst there, he successfully passed his diploma at the Institute of Legal Executives. Now, just to place this in context, there are a number of whether politicians or lawyers who left Barbados in the early 70s to pursue education in the UK. And Ezra Allen obviously was in that category of persons. Either you became a barrister or you became a solicitor. And so he was of a unique crop of individuals who I think wanted to represent people. And obviously they gravitated because of their debating skills as well to law, which for me as well also meant that law was an avenue or a gateway to becoming a politician. And as I was growing up, certainly it was an obvious pathway, which is if you wanted to be like the caliber of the persons who had been existing at the time, then that was the pathway if you wanted to represent people in politics. Many of them took the route of becoming a barrister or a solicitor in the UK, and then returning to Barbados and being accepted into to the bar here, and then entering into practice as well. It was after graduating, though, from the university that he took to teaching as well at the South Bank Polytechnic and Kennington College. And he later returned to Barbados to assume position again in teaching as a law lecturer and tutor at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. It was at Cave Hill campus, though, that he distinguished himself as an expert in constitutional law. The truth is that if you were thinking of a go-to person in the legal profession, Ezra was at the top of your list in terms of getting an opinion from him on things related to the Constitution. And I suspect because he had spent the time in the UK, he obviously studied closely the Westminster system of government on which this system is also modeled, and developed a keen interest in the way in which government works, but also governance as a whole. And you could always expect that you could open the newspaper whenever there was any interesting discussion on the Constitution, and you could find an article or comment written by Ezra Allen. His brilliance as well, though, was not only in the area of constitutional law. Ezra also exhibited brilliance in his early years of practice at the criminal bar, and soon he was referenced by his peers as the Perry Mason of law in Barbados. His prowess and his tenacity as a brilliant lawyer was recounted by many of his peers, and many of them, again, regarded his opinions highly in relation to constitutional matters, but also in relation to the law. As I said earlier, I have fond memories of Ezra Allen. Certainly in my latter years in chambers with the Cheltenhams, we would work together very closely in settling and negotiating personal injury matters. The thing about it was that Ezra was never wanting to give up any money, and so the negotiations were always long and arduous in terms of our discussions. He did not want to give up a bad penny, as he would work oftentimes for the insurance companies. And so we would have quite a bit of banter. At the end of the negotiation, though, what was always interesting is that he would smile, he would tilt the glasses a little bit and look at you, and he would say, "If you were not Brady's daughter, I would give you real trouble, you know." And so I really always appreciated, the stories that came from Ezra in relation to his early years and his struggles to be able to be the best at what he did. But I always remember him always asking for my father as well in all of our encounters. They had a long history, and they both run in the 1976 election. And I will share with young Nathan and the family, I have one of the manifestos of 1976 with me today, which my father was able to dust off of out of the filing cabinet and produce, showing a much younger Ezra Allen. And so I will share that with you later. But the good thing was, again, that he had, there was a mutual respect for his colleagues, and certainly a mutual respect by his peers within the profession as well. He was an ardent supporter of the Barbados Labour Party, and he made an indelible contribution to the party, one which the Barbados Labour Party will be forever grateful to him for. Again, he always was there not just to defend, but also to bring balance in the conversation about any issues that arose, whether in relation mainly to the constitutional issues of the day. He entered politics at a time in 1976 at the age of 32. Again, quite young, along with people like Dame Billy and Sir Richard, Lionel Craig, Sir Henry Ford, my father at the time, part of what was then the great combination, the Tom Adams cabinet. And so I'm sure that anybody in that period would have learned quite a bit from the then former Prime Minister of the day, and would have certainly had laid the foundation for a lot of his thinking, and certainly a lot of the things that he did afterwards within politics. He had defeated Sir Philip Graves, Queen's Counsel, in the 1976 election to win the constituency of St. Michael Northwest. But then he was defeated in 1981 by the same Sir Philip Graves. That is the way politics sometimes plays you. And that's why I always maintain you must plan for being out of politics while you are in politics as well. And it is always important to cultivate those good relationships while you're in the chamber. During this singular term in office, though, and in his representation of the St. Michael Northwest constituency, he also served as a deputy speaker of the House of Assembly for the period 1976 to 1978. On his passing, Prime Minister Motley commented on Ezra's unmatched commitment to research and also his understanding of the letter and spirit of the law. She mentioned that he was never one to argue any matter, whether in or outside of the courtroom or in Parliament, without a comprehensive understanding of the prior arguments or decisions on the subject. Ezra Allen was extremely thorough in terms of his research and his approach to his craft. And if that is one thing that I believe that we must be the takeaway, is that in order to achieve excellence, you have to put in the hard work in order to get out of it what you want. It was against this background that he distinguished himself as the go-to person on also parliamentary democracy issues. Basically, anything to do with the Westminster style of government, Ezra Allen was the authority on it. And this was reflected in his weekly column in the Nation newspaper as well. And I think anyone who would have worked around Parliament in the 1970s and beyond would have known of his passion, his commitment, and his knowledge in this particular area as well. Barbadians would also remember Ezra Allen as the attorney at law who successfully defended Britain's great train robber, a gentleman by the name of Ronnie Biggs, during an extradition hearing in the 1981 period. Biggs, who had robbed a mail train back in 1963, was kidnapped in Brazil and brought to Barbados. And apparently he had gotten to know Ezra when Ezra was a young clerk in England and had nicknamed him Sunshine when he first saw him in the court. I can only assume that the terminology sunshine came from the fact that he came from Barbados, and that England is often very dreary and rainy and dull, and therefore he was a ray of sunshine, both perhaps by the way he spoke, but also I'm sure about his appreciation for his country, Barbados. And just like most other Barbadians, wherever you go, you can talk about Barbados. And I'm sure that that is why he was referred to in that way. The other good thing about Ezra Allen was that he was always available to his students at the university, as well as his legal counterparts, and I'm sure my colleagues here today will also speak to that aspect. I know the AG will also speak later. And he was always very courteous. He had a very British demeanor in the way in which he engaged with you. But it was always one that was respectful. It was very professional at all times, and nobody doubted that Ezra was going to defend to the bitter end whatever his position was, right or wrong, I'm sure. But he was going to defend right the way through, and he would not leave a stone unturned in his defense of any individual or any matter, certainly. Ezra's life, whether in or out of politics, reflected an underlying belief that everyone deserves representation. And that came through in his fearless demeanor, certainly representing his clients both in the criminal courts, but also, as I said earlier, his position in relation to constitutional matters as well. He was well respected at the local bar, and he was also well respected throughout the region. But his desire to represent also extended beyond the courtroom, and he was legal advisor to the Nation Publishing Company, as well as legal representative for the Public Utilities Board for over 10 years. He was also regarded for his expertise in international business law, double taxation treaties, and corporate law. And he did have a stint as the chairman of the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, as well as the National Housing Corporation. And I know that if he was around today, with all that is happening in terms of the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, I'm sure that you would probably hear his voice, or you would see an article appear in the newspaper in relation to that particular entity as well. In our discussions with the parliamentary group, one of our colleagues had mentioned, and I don't know if it is a fact, but I will mention it here because I'm almost certain that there is some accuracy to it, that he was one of the first, if not the first, black attorneys in Barbados to own his own practice and the premises from which he operated. And it may seem to some insignificant, but if you cast your mind back to the period in which he operated, fresh out of the law school in the UK, coming back to Barbados, it was very significant in terms of that period for Black people as lawyers to first of all go into law, but then to be able to set their eyes on being able to own their own practice. And I'm sure, having worked in chambers in the UK, he would no doubt have been stimulated in thought as to what he wanted in terms of, being able to create his own entity as well, that he would have persons working for him later on in life. And therefore, we are grateful to him for his contribution in that way, for blazing the trail, because then it saw the emergence of other individuals. The Cheltenhams, for instance, also owned their property as well, and other attorneys also went on to own properties in Barbados and law firms as well. As a father, he has been described by his eldest daughter, Gail, as an endearing man, one who showed love to his children in the midst of all of his accomplishments, because they were not just the recipients of his brilliant mind, but the truth is that as children, you often get to see a different side, a softer side of your father or your mother in public life. And I'm sure that the 5-year stint that Ezra had in politics was not long enough to be a turn-off to the children. And so I am sure that they, in their own way, will find a way to be of service in one way or the other, maybe not in politics directly, but certainly to be able to find a way to be of service and to exhibit the same level of brilliance that their father did in Barbadian politics and certainly in the legal profession. I therefore want to thank the family for lending him to us, to say to, in particular, the children and young Nathan, that the takeaway from all of this is that you have a legacy of which you must be proud, and that no matter what, nobody can take away the contribution that Ezra Allen made to the political and legal landscape of this country. And therefore, you should use that as your encouragement to do well and to continue to be of service in this country and certainly beyond these shores as well. The Reverend Canon Ivan Herwit was born on December 17th of 1936 in Lears to the late Helen and Joseph Herwit. He would have died on the 15th of August of 2022 at the age of 85 years. Reverend Herwit was the husband of Adele Herwit, the father of 3 children, Curtis, Mark, who is the current chaplain of the house, and Suzanne, grandfather of Ayana and Camus, brother of Etha and Van and the late Elysia, Duncan, Carlotta, and Lionel. He's also the uncle of Dennis Tull and Sir Louis Tull. Reverend Herwit was a beloved family man who was described as loving unconditionally. He pursued his childhood dream, which led him to the clergy, and became an Anglican priest from the year 1975. He's been described as a gifted and strong leader who inspired and empowered many young people to get into the church. And I suspect young Mark, who no doubt was influenced by his father as well, as many of us are when we have strong parents who blaze a trail in a particular area, to also give of service to not just to God, but also to the people as well. Reverend Herwit worked with the various Sunday schools, which again meant that he would have influenced a lot of our young minds across the churches where he would have been responsible for within the diocese. And a number of those young students of Sunday school, I am sure, have been able to take away a lot of the foundation principles that he would have transposed onto them in their early years. I know for me, I don't forget anything I learned in Sunday school. So all of the Proverbs, all of the Psalms have left an indelible mark on me, certainly even as I am a grown adult. And I'm sure that in the capacity that Canon Herod would have had in those early formative years for a number of our young people, that many of those principles have been able to guide them in their decision-making in the course of the next couple of years. He also served as the rector of the Christchurch Parish Church until his retirement in 2004. He was also the chaplain of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and served as chaplain of this House of Assembly for almost 30 years. His period covered post-independence Barbados, ranging from economic growth as well as decline to life-changing political episodes. And it may seem simple that a chaplain comes to the chamber every time we sit and says prayers, but I think it also speaks to the historical side of Barbadian society, that we always believe that the business that we come here to do in serving the people should receive the necessary blessings and acknowledgement of someone who is higher than us in our execution of our duties as well. And so it seems simple, but it is not so simple in terms of, I think, our reverence to something higher and someone higher. And we are grateful to him and now to his son for being able to provide that level of, in a sense, the word to each of us and guidance when we start our day in this chamber, that we are reminded that we are here to do what we do in the honor of the people of this country who have sent us here. And I do appreciate the fact that we start our days on that note, because sometimes you might be minded to forget, but Reverend Herwood has continued even in this tenure as well to remind us of the importance of why we are here and what we are here to do. He was also affectionately known as a true friend to the community in which he served. His life as a priest as well as a family man was threaded together because of his strong belief in God. He did his duties week after week, year after year, never once showing a hint of interest in attracting the limelight or any political label to himself. I recall as a young senator as well, I think his son is very much like his father, in that he comes, does his business, prays for us, and has a conversation with members and leaves. And it is interesting because I don't want to say like father, like son, but the truth of the matter, I see very similar qualities in the approach to the role and the function as chaplain of this particular chamber. His was an approach, I believe, that was worthy of emulation. He was a selfless individual who put the interests of people first. He was an outstanding clergyman who was as loving and friendly as he was quiet and unassuming. And he was renowned for his training methods and would have been responsible for the upward mobility across the Anglican diocese. While most Barbadians would know Reverend Herwood as the most dignified man of God and a servant of the people, many would not be aware that he had worked in the nursing service in Britain, and that this, I believe, was just another continuation of his giving and his compassionate nature, which he exhibited certainly in his role as chaplain in this Parliament. I therefore want to thank his family for lending him to us as well, and to allow him to be able to, through his prayers at the beginning of our sessions, and certainly at various functions, to being able to help to guide us and to root us in the reminder of why we are here. And certainly, even though he was not a serving member of Parliament, the truth is that he has served the country well, he has served this Parliament well, and today we acknowledge not just the other parliamentarians, but we also acknowledge his contribution to this country as well, and say a heartfelt thank you to the family for allowing us to share a part of your father and of your husband as well. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, want to, again, on behalf of all of the members of Parliament, all who have served in Parliament and all who have been represented in some way by these individuals here today that we've mentioned, that we say a special thank you to them, and that we remember the role that they have played in our society, and hope that they can be examples of good leadership, good stewardship, and good representation in Barbados. My colleagues, I'm sure, will speak on individual members, or they will speak generally, but I therefore, again, on behalf of my own family, and certainly in particular on behalf of my father, wish to say a special thank you to each and every one of them, and may they all rest in peace.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to join this obituary presentation, and in particular, I want to focus, although I recognize that all three men played a tremendous role in helping in the development of this country and helping to play a pivotal role in this Parliament and the work that it performs. However, I want to make special mention of my friend, Johnny Tudor. It's interesting that only today I was able to read in the brief that was prepared that Mr. Tudor went to Abbey Preparatory School. And it took me back to when I was 4 years old. I don't know who remembers when they were 4 years old, but I certainly do. Because at 4 years old, maybe the MP for St. Michael's South Central, I believe she has suggested that she remembers when she was 2 and 3, I don't know. But I do remember when I was 4 years old. And I went to a preparatory school, which was the same Abbey school that the former honourable member went to. Of course, many years after. But it is something that we shared. And like Johnny Tudor, I share an absolute passion, as did he, for representing the people of his constituency. And he was a very passionate and strong individual. And I remember some discussions we had with him, and as I even watched the things that he did when he was a member of Parliament, it showed his absolute dedication to the constituency that he was given the opportunity to represent. I had personal interaction with Johnny when he was a BMW salesman. And in fact, making negotiations with him for my mother. And he was an excellent salesman. People often said that Johnny had the gift of the gab. And he was able to leverage that ability in all spheres and all walks of life. And I am sure that his family is absolutely proud of what he was able to accomplish for himself over the years. I am particularly moved as well, Mr. Speaker, for the work that he did for the disabled in the disabled community. And I know the member for St. James North has intimated that he will speak on the tremendous work that he and also his spouse continues to do in the disabled community. And as I was driving here today, I in fact saw one of the buses being used to transport the members of the disabled. And it had an interesting slogan on it: disability is not inability. And I think that that is something that we all need to internalize. Many people of this world have disabilities of various levels, of various kinds. But a disability can never be seen as an inability. And the reason why that slogan ran forth to me on the bus that is being used is that when Johnny Tudor was the Minister of Transport, and he was a Minister of Transport like I was, he was able to get a disabled bus for it to be able to transport people in the disabled community. And I thought that was an excellent opportunity. A bus for the disabled, a bus for the disabled. My colleagues are telling me to rephrase it. A bus for the disabled. But the vernacular in the base, people will call it the disabled bus, because that's what they would reach out to me and say. But I focus on that because when we were designing the new electric buses, we focused on the fact that the disabled people had to be able to travel on those buses like everybody else. So we incorporated the ramps. We got the buses so they could kneel. We had a place that if you had a wheelchair, it would go into a slot and be able to use a seat belt for it. This was all part of the legacy that was set first by the member, Johnny Tudor. Now, we recognize that he was a member of Parliament for the other side, and we forgive him for that. And he also saw the light in his later years, and we accept that he saw the light and came over and was able to be instrumental even in the constituency of St. Lucie for the member for St. Lucie. Spoke on his platform often first, starting the batting as the opening batsman many nights. And we are really, really appreciative of all of the work that he did when he then saw the light and came over and left the dark side. But we understand that. So I definitely have to say that on a personal level, I also had interaction with Johnny when we were negotiating a matter for the Ministry of Housing. And I must say that he was one of the hardest negotiators I have come up against. And I tend to do a lot of negotiations for the government or in my personal life, negotiating land or property interactions. I could not get over get over Johnny Tudor. Anytime that I felt I was making headway, he would resort to passion. And he would go into a very passionate representation of why his side was more important and why this had to be the way. And no matter how I tried, Johnny Tudor always prevailed. So I salute the work that he was able to do. I salute how he was able to represent his people. I salute how he was able to then become a man of the cloth as well and to take on that mantle, again, using his ability to be clear, to be concise, to be able to speak to the average person, to be able to show that passion and show that dedication in every single thing that he did. And I am proud to say that he was a friend of mine. I also could not take my seat without recognizing the former chaplain of this Honourable Parliament. He was instrumental in guiding us. And you know, many times people come to Parliament and you hear the prayer and it becomes a formality to some extent for some members. But I listen very, very carefully to the prayer. And often that prayer sets the tone for the day for me. And here we had a tremendous way of, although being the consummate Christian, also a very humble person, but always giving you a kind word, a word of encouragement, a word of today might be a difficult day, but tomorrow will be better. When I was contemplating doing my master's in theology, I spoke to him a few times about it, and he always was encouraging and encouraged me to go forward, do your master's, and get that behind you. You will benefit from it. And I was happy that I took his advice. So again, a man that made a tremendous contribution, not only to Barbados, but also in these walls, and made our lives that little bit better, that reassurance that he provided us whenever we came into these halls. So, Mr. Speaker, I commend all of these members who made a tremendous contribution to this Parliament, and I look forward as well to hearing other members as they make their contribution in this obituary. I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I wish to add my personal experience as well as all the other comments and accolades that are being extended this morning on behalf of these distinguished gentlemen who have gone to the great beyond. And I would wish, sir, to start as a proud Anglican with none other than Canon H. Haywood. Sir, I see you're smiling because you know well too your All Souls connection and others. But in any case, despite whatever religion there is that we are involved in, once we are reflecting on Almighty God, that's fine for me. And therefore, that whole inclusive approach with faith-based institutions in this country, where we can all come together as one and worship and praise and make sure that people leave us better than they would have come. And so this morning, I want to dedicate most of what I will wish to say to none other than Canon H. Haywood. And somehow I never was able to find out what the H represented. But when I reflect on the personality of the goodly gentleman now deceased and the performance that he extended to the rest of this society and the world, I have found 3 words that I have added. As a matter of fact, I was saying perhaps his mother would have given him those names because she recognized that each of those letters in the names spoke of goodliness, of service, and of course, embracing of the people with whom he came in contact with across the rest of the world. So I looked at the name Ivan. And being an old primary school teacher, sir, you will expect this, because that is how we had to reach out and touch children and make them feel comfortable and attract their attention. So I looked at the I and I said, what an inspiring man Canon Haywood was. He was so virtuous. You looked at him, you could tell that he was somebody delegated by God to lead in the institution of the church that he chose to be a part of. Quite an affable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, sir. And his whole demeanor was so nurturing that I feel proud to have known him. And then, as I said, I did not know what the H represented, but I thought that his parents would have looked at it and said, H, he's going to be a humble human being. He's going to be helpful. And with the holiness in him, a humanitarian spirit will be unleashed. And so said, so done to this great man whom we honor today. He was born not quite at Christmas time, but on the 17th of December in 1936. And God has been so good to him that he lived for almost 86 years. And of course, he continued to sojourn in the field, inspiring and preaching, reaching, touching lives and turning them around. What an awesome, goodly gentleman he would have been. And therefore, it is no wonder why he was he had extended to him the Silver Crown of Merit for his very outstanding service, not only to Barbados, but in England and in other parts of the world, because those young men and women, and preferably men at that time, because the Anglican Church did not have too many females in going into the altar and preaching, but he would have extended that across the rest of the world, because when he left Barbados, he ensured that he had gone to England and became a nurse. And you know, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be a nurse, it calls for persons who care about life and living and making people feel confident in the services that are being offered. And it is no wonder why, when he pursued that career as a nurse, that he had done so for years in England. And of course, Mr. Speaker, sir, he became then ordained as a priest in the church in October 26, 1975, and respectively in 1976, October again. And he also served the curacy at the All Saints, McLevion, in 1976 to 77, and at Radcliffe, and this is all in England, on Trent, in 1977 to 78, and as I said, the Church of England. But he returned to BIM, the lovely country with which he had had so many connections, and which he determined that he would serve with his family in 1978, and went into the ministry at St. Ambrose Church, which is right here in the city of Bridgetown, from 1978 to 1984. And then, of course, he left the Bridgetown and went into Christ Church, at the Christ Church Parish Church from 1984 to March 2002, serving for 18 consecutive years. And I have been to the Christ Church Parish Church. I have seen and heard him and the inspirational preaching that he extended. And of course, I believe that the church hall up there would be part of his vision to be able to not only do ministering with the holiness of it all, but of course, allowing residents and others to come and have their meetings there, to come and be engaged in wedding receptions, to be involved in so many other activities. And to my mind, that is a man who would have had the confidence and the courage to reach out and touch. And I witnessed that. Even though I have not been a member of any of his churches, sir, I still belong to that little church on the hill, way up in St. Thomas, called the Holy Innocents. And you know, sir, what that represents when I indicate that. I also want to say, sir, that he further served in the faith ministry and was instituted to the stall on June 1996 and served in the Anglican Diocese as a member of the Dean and the chapter of St. Michael and All Angels Cathedral, which is right here again in the city. He also, because of his outstanding performance and his way to reach and touch and inspire the congregations, he also served as rural dean at the Christ Church until he retired. He never, Mr. Speaker, wavered with his commitment to God nor his service to humanity. And I think that is so profound that so many other young priests, and I know that his goodly son, sir, would have emulated his dad, and he is with us and has been doing excellent work. I know at the St. Barnabas Church, but I cannot go any further because sometimes there are shifts and changes as persons move through the system in the churches, but I know that I can speak to of his commitment. So it says to me that dad would have nurtured his son in a way to follow in his footsteps. And I believe that there are very few households in this country where father and son and daughter perhaps have been continuing in the same environment for work. Because sometimes people are teachers and they say, I don't want my child, it's too much to do teaching, too much nagging. Or an officer, a police officer, and then allow the exposure, I don't want my son to be in that, and I went through. No, I believe that Father Knight followed in his father's footsteps, and he too is making that outstanding contribution to the people of Barbados, and by extension, the people of the world, because nowadays we have the virtual sermons and so on going as a result of COVID, and people across the world are able to follow the speeches, the sermons, all the other activities. Canon Harewood did not quite have that, the late Canon Harewood, but I'm sure that his son and all others will continue to be able to reach out and touch and turn this world around. We need more persons, young persons as well, sir, to be in the priesthood or to be in apostles or reverends or whatever names are given, because we see what's happening in our society. And without us following in the footsteps of the late Canon Harewood and making sure that we nurture our young people to know that there is a God in heaven who wants us to follow in the footsteps and to be able to do the things that will hold communities, first households, communities, and then the entire society together, we are going to lose more of our people through all kinds of negative activities that this speech this morning, sir, will not in any way engage. I also want, sir, to say that his service as a priest in charge at St. Ambrose in 2003, an assistant priest at St. Barnabas, and the churches there, he so ministered to so many people. And then he went further with his work. Rather, beyond the church, he became the chaplain at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And then, of course, sir, this honorable chamber, where he served for an extremely long period of time. He was the second longest serving chaplain, sir, I must say, in Barbados in this distinguished chamber, after 28 years of sacrifice and quality, dignified service. And I say hats off to his family for helping him to be able to achieve that goal, because it's no easy tasks. There are no easy tasks for families who have to have partners and leaders in the household away from home for so long, but he did it and did it well, hence his son following in the footsteps. When he exited that role in 2014. Canon Haywood possessed that quiet demeanor in everything he said and did. As a young person, not only here, sir, but in the Anglican Church, I admired the ease with which he moved. When you looked at him, there was always this glow, this smile. You could not fathom the individual. But when you heard him speak, nothing like me, Mr. Speaker, sir. I can speak very loudly and sometimes it can be very soft. But he was always level with what he had to say, but it attracted the attention of his parishioners and others. And I think he did it with grace. Let me say it that way. That will better express what I wish to say, sir, on his behalf. So Canon Haywood, he had that kind of way of embracing people and endearing them towards him. And anybody who approached him, sir, anyone who approached him, they did it without any fear of being insulted or overlooked or embarrassed. And I think that too is extremely important. He will always give them that attention that is necessary. And I pray that others in the priesthood and in other fora, whether it be in the employment sector or in the village or as God prayer, that they develop that demeanor, because that is what has made Barbados what it is. Persons reaching out and touching and turning lives around because of the treatment that is meted out to those individuals. Canon Haywood carried it with a measure of perfection, I would say. I've never seen him angry yet. I've never lived in the house with him. But I've never seen him angry yet, because he knew how to be able to manage the anger and the way that he treated people. Treatment of people, Mr. Speaker, is extremely important, not only in Barbados, but in the rest of the world. And too many people are ill-treated with the most simple query or comment they were made. Canon Haywood was beyond that, and I want to thank God for his witness and what he had been able to do with others, to be able to listen to them with the compassionate ears and to offer the kind of guidance that made a difference in their lives and made people feel wanted. We need to get back to that, or for those who continue to do it, let us do it with grace and make Barbadians and others among us feel well. During his pastoral service too, sir, he always extended kindness. He embraced people. He offered that kind of quality advice and respect despite the occasion. That too is critical. I want other priests and pastors and deacons and bishops and others to take a leaf out of his book. It is worth the while, because our world is changing, the technology is taking over, and we are forgetting the soft skills and the necessary things that make people comfortable and want to be a part of whatever institution there is. Some people turn away because of how badly they're treated in a lot of institutions, but Canon Haywood never did it. And I want others, not only out there or in the priesthood or in churches or in schools or communities, but even in this distinguished chamber, tear a leaf out of Canon Haywood's book. It will put those persons and all of us in good stead, because I am not excused from it. It will put us all in good stead. During his pastoral services, sir, as I said, he extended those kudos to people and made them feel comfortable and never shamed anybody, despite their age or their position in life or status in life or character. He always made them feel comfortable, and the respect flowed from him to them and from them to him, which is extremely important as well. There were several other people who were nurtured at his feet. The ordinance, the curates, the clergy, and many others were given his guidance through the quality service, and we can see it also as we move around in the various institutions across Barbados. I also want, sir, to say he has lived a wonderful life. 86 years is a long time to live. But you know, sir, he could not have done it, because in Barbados, and I believe in other sayings across the world, people say, behind every successful man, there is a woman. And in this case, I want to say a powerful woman, and none other than, I call her Madam Adele. I met her, and you know, sir, I am over the hills now with age. But I met her as she did her social work to educate Barbadians in the times when there was no television or limited television, hardly any telephone, hardly any form of communication in the way we do it, so we did letters, or we would have to use the government's phones in the school. So I met her once, perhaps I believe in the 1970s, when I was an integral part of the PTA in the school where I worked. And no time would she have been invited to attend that she did not accede to the request, and had the PTA sitting and literally looking into her mouth because of the kind of wisdom that she shared with them. Because you know, sir, at that time, ordinary women with many children could not go anywhere. But once they heard that we had a guest speaker and they learned that it was Mrs. Adele Haywood, they made it their business to be there, because she talked about nurturing children. She talked about the family planning. She talked about so many different things that parents needed to be made aware of. And that captured my attention. And she too, an affable, beautiful, well-attired woman every time. I believe, sir, that I had to pick some leaves out of her book in the entire part, because when you want to present yourself to people, you must do it with grace and make sure that you can tap into them, that you can capture their attention. And so across the island of Barbados, sir, she would have given those lectures, those speeches, those demonstrations, the advice that parents at that time required, because all they had was a rediffusion, perhaps, nothing more. And therefore, the message was out there, reaching them in the spaces where they occupied, in the schools and the villages and other churches and so on. I believe, sir, she must have been a very active member of the Priest's Wives Association, and of course, the Mothers Union and all the other institutions within the Anglican Church, because that is where the grounding can happen for young women and young men in those institutions. Her elegance, her grace, Mr. Speaker, sir, the hard work, everything else that you could expect in a woman would have been Mrs. Adele, who is here with us this morning. And I am so happy to see how she has continued to survive. She has lost her husband, but she too would have been steeped in the faith that he has gone to the great beyond, but he had served his time well on earth and with distinction. Therefore, she's going to be going through the moments. She's only human. Her children are going to be going through the moments. They're only human, but they understand. Daddy at 86 years has gone to the great beyond, but he laid the foundation in this society and in others before he left this goodly earth. And so I know that her heart will be overwhelmed at this time, because we're bringing back memories in her thoughts and in that of her family. But we share in these moments of grief, because it was only last year that he passed away. And we share the moments of grief with them and ask God to continue to strengthen and to bless them in every way possible. I want to, sir, to conclude, as I take this opportunity to publicly express gratitude to the Haywood family for the excellent service offered to Barbados through the mother, through the son, through the father, and through the children, because I am sure that whatever the values and the morals were that he has passed them on, not only to his household, but many of the generations with whom he interacted across the rest of Barbados and the world. And therefore, I would want to extend my deepest sympathy to Madam Haywood, to her family, and to the members of the various congregations in the Anglican faith and in other religious and other institutions, and ask that his soul may rest in peace. And then I want to acknowledge the presence of Mrs. Tracy Aline and her relatives and others of the late Ezra Aline, whose tenure on earth was steeped in serving the people of Barbados. You could not question his ability to be able to respond, and the level of knowledge that he would have had in his head that he displayed in the actions in his legal office, as well as in other areas of Barbados. And so I want to remember him fondly, because I acknowledge that there are many other distinguished members here who will wish to make their contribution. And of course, I would have had a closer relationship perhaps with him than any other person in here, because I would have been a member of the Labour Party since 1970. And I don't believe there are many folk in here of this age, not even the honourable member for St. Michael East, because he is only a little newcomer in the way that I am. But, and I never displayed any politics in any institution, Mr. Speaker, sir. Never in the classroom, never in the church, never in anything. And that is how we should be as politicians, because to ostracize people, it makes them uncomfortable. But the final comment that we wish to make, sir, is to acknowledge as well the presence of the late Joseph Onesimus Tudor and family, and Mrs. Roseanne Tudor, who is a wonderful organizer and works exclusively with the disabled across the country. We've already heard that. I want to extend my sympathy to them. And of course, when I met the late Joseph Tudor, when I met the late Joseph Tudor, Johnny, the nickname, from the time I saw him and I saw his antics, I said, you look like somebody that I know. And he said, so who you think I am, though? I said, you got to be George Tudor's son, though. Man, that man was a comedian out of this world. And of course, Mr. Speaker, my busy self, the only one of 8 that has this personality, had gone to the children's party at Ready Fusion and performed a poem as well, sir, and was very well done too. I got a lot of claps, so I know the fact that they clapped for me at that time as a small child, 7 or 8 years old, then you know. But the comedy that Barbadians received and the kind of nurturing through Auntie Olga, now the late Doris Provençals, I think that's Auntie Olga's name, and then the same Joe Tudor, and he would have had the same name, I believe, as his son. And then Frank Pardo and Alfred Pragnell, and none other than the late, from the disabled community as well, from St. James, Carson Small. When they were doing all the antics and changing their voices, it captured the attention of young Barbadians who had no avenues to show or showcase their skills in the area of culture. So children's party on a Saturday morning was the best thing that happened to Barbadians at that time, because as I said, there was no technology. And so when I saw him, I said, you got to be Joe Tudor's son, boy. You got to be a real joker, though. And that was jokingly said, of course, Mr. Speaker. I would never have disrespected Brother Johnny in that way. I want to say that on behalf of my family and, of course, the people of Barbados, to say how grateful we are for the contribution he has made to Barbados, having served as a member of Parliament and having been with the disability unit and so on, and to be able to give and give and give, I think that speaks volumes of the man and his personality. And so it was this morning as well to extend my deepest sympathy and that of my family and the people of St. Thomas and Barbados to the family, and to thank them too for helping to let him serve with the people of Barbados to be able to bring inspiration, knowledge, skills, employment, and all the other things that go with it, because sometimes people seem to think politicians only stay in this distinguished chamber and talk, but we go out there and we touch lives and turn them around without going on any TV. Well, they didn't have any TV in a lot of days anyhow. But without going on TV, without shouting on the mountain top, I helped Peter, I helped James, Mary, and so we never did it like that. And therefore, I want to thank Mr. Tudor, the late Joseph Onesimus Tudor, for the work that he done, the excellent work that he has done to help with the development of Barbados. And I want to thank you, sir, for giving me the privilege, and pray that God will continue to let the souls of the dearly departed gentlemen whom we have honored today, or we have eulogized today. I want to ask God to let their souls rest in peace and rise again in glory. I wish to thank you sincerely, sir.
Honourable Member for St. Michael West.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the privilege of speaking this morning. And as my colleague just said from Christchurch West, all 3 of these Barbadians have distinguished themselves in their service to the public. But I feel especially obligated to stand here today and to lend my voice in tribute to the late Reverend Dr. Joseph Johnny Tudor, who I consider to be a great Barbadian humanist and politician. So I must admit to this chamber that he and his sisters, Denise, who is now deceased, and Joanne, are friends of my family. And Johnny and my dad were very good friends. In fact, the honourable member from Christchurch West just asked if we knew what we were doing at 4 years old. And I would tell you, my first meeting with Johnny is when my father took me to the races in a box that Johnny was in. And both of them had a passion for horses. Hopefully not slow ones. But I also feel obligated to speak about a man who had the spirit of philanthropy. And he and my dad shared that passion. And quite frequently, Johnny would find his way down to our family business, asking my father for food stuff to put into hampers for all kinds of people. Not only people who hailed from his constituency, but people all over Barbados. And that was the mark of the man. And thirdly, and certainly not the least, I feel obligated to stand here and give my voice to a man who was a brethren of the University of Waterford, where myself, the Honourable Speaker, and the AG hail from. And I also want to welcome my brothers and sisters who are here to represent that esteemed school. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned
I remember
before,
there's some people who are jealous and vexed, but ignore these asides. Ignore the asides, Honourable Member, please.
But Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned before, he was a prolific donor to people of all walks of life. Hence the obvious partnership with my father, who was quite willing to give to people in the city of Bridgetown. And as the Morris clan from Westbury Road would have told me, that he was a man that would give $1 with 10 cents in his pocket. What I found especially inspiring about him is that in his ministerial portfolios, in both of them, he would look after anybody who came to him. It didn't matter if you were from his constituency, he would have all Barbadians. And as the Morris clan said to me, that even on his sick bed, he was on the phone looking for help. And my colleague from St. Andrew would be pleased to hear he was looking for help for a lady from Orange Hill. That is absolutely remarkable. That for two reasons. One, he was no longer a politician, but had the deep feeling of giving service to the public still. And this lady was not even in his constituency, probably didn't know her that well. But that was just the man that we speak of here today. That passion and empathy for people. So, sir, this was the heart of the man. And he was a public servant for 2 terms, hailing from St. Michael East, of which my brother to my right is now the current representative. And I could say that, as my father used to call it, retail politics. What it means is empathy, passion for people, putting people at the center of everything that you do was definitely passed down from Dr. Don Blackman to Joseph Shooter, and then to my brother to my right, who definitely has the people in his heart. So that is one successful succession plan. That was not a plan in a coronation, but a plan in having the people at the center of everything you do. So as a government, as we seek to, for the second time, pass integrity legislation, which will put the guardrails on ourselves as public servants and also future public servants as it pertains to financial conduct which will keep us honest. But sir, this is not the only definition of integrity. Mr. Speaker, I say to you that what is also the hallmarks of integrity is dependability. And without a doubt, I could say that this is something that accurately describes the good Mr. Tudor. Also, loyalty. Loyalty to our mission and our creed as a government and a party. This is what we can learn from him as well. And as my fellow colleague from Christchurch West just alluded to, is that Johnny could probably sell snow to Eskimo. His mouth was real, real sweet. And that quality obviously served him well when he was the group brand manager of McInerney Quality Motors. And I would tell everyone in here today that Johnny managed to convince my father to invest in 5 lease vehicles that I inherited. Now, I can't see to get rid of them. So that is Johnny right there. He convinced my father, convinced me the best thing to do is to lease these vehicles. So that is on a personal note. And I think that when we give tribute, it's important for the public to hear, more personal stories about these great Barbadians that will give them depth, that the public can understand what these men gave to the public. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, this son of the soil, what I think about the most is that Bob Marley song. Johnny was a good man. He wasn't a perfect man, like none of us are. But through his work with persons with disability, as you heard from the 2 members just now, with the Disabilities Unit, and in his work with the tourism sector, as the scion of that famous phrase, and I didn't even know until I saw the brief that he could be credited to tourism is our business, let's play our part. That obviously was a fantastic slogan, which was hugely successful, but it showed the creativity of this man. And that is something that I think young people today can take a lesson from. That creativity is key in everything that we do, including politics. So his legacy continues through those accomplishments. But also I'd like to say to everyone today that it's obvious that his legacy continues as a nation builder and through his beautiful family. Mr. Speaker, with that, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to today join in the eulogies being given to 3 outstanding Barbadians who have served in various ways the public of this country. The first of the 3 who I would have met would have been Ezra Ali. When I was, if I recall, about 13, 14 years old, he lived near where I lived with my parents in Grisette's Terrace, and he was, of course, getting ready to contest the next general elections in the constituency near there in 1976. I believe at that time, in fact, it was designated constituency of St. Michael North. Slightly different configuration of what it is right now, because as you would know, sir, as a St. Michael Member of Parliament, at that time there were 8 St. Michael, there were not as many St. Michael constituencies as there are now. Your St. Michael Central seat, for one, was created after that time of the 1976 elections. And Ezra was a regular visitor to my house. I must say that. My mum taught at Commermere at that time. She was an extremely well-respected teacher there. And my father, of course, as a lawyer and a strong member of the Barbados Labour Party. There was no stronger member of the Barbados Labour Party than my father was. And Ezra used to come there and they used to chat. And I remember many occasions, Ezra and I talking, because both of us are born in May. And we used to go through the amount of world-famous people who were born in May. And we had a consensus that May was the best month of the year. So those were the times that I best remember Ezra from that start, not even speaking about us as lawyers together, sir, where we would have done some matters on opposite sides and personal injury matters especially, where he acted on behalf of the insurance company. I knew his two daughters well, of course, his wife, Gail, his daughter, and Gail used to play tennis at one time, Paragon Tennis Club, of which I'm still a member. And, you know, it's those fond memories that I have of Ezra Aline. Reverend Canon Ivan Harewood, sir. And it hasn't been mentioned yet, and I noticed that significantly, that Canon Harewood was president of the Barbados Council for the Disabled between 1983 and 1984. So there we join ties, sir, that Canon Harewood served the office of people and the cause of people with disabilities in an era where it was not fashionable to do so. That was even before my time of service started to people with disabilities, about 33, 34 years ago, sir. And for that, of course, I commend him. His picture stands in the Harambee House, the Barbados Council for the Disabled, as a former president. Out of the three outstanding individuals who we are eulogizing today, sir, of course, the one I would have known best is Dr. Joseph Johnny Truder, mainly because, as has been said previously by, I think, two members, our joining together in the cause for persons with disabilities. But Johnny, of course, is a lot more than that. He would have served, as we have heard, on the Barbados Tourism Association Board. He would have been head of the Public Relations Committee of that. And yes, Johnny credited himself for formulating the slogan, tourism is our business, let's all do our part. He told me that many times, that he was the individual on the board who formulated that slogan. Having served as a board member on the tourism board, sir, those of us who have followed politics for decades would recall the circumstances in which he came into electoral politics, sir. In 1991, on nomination day for the elections, the Democratic Labour Party was still hoping that Don Blackman would be their candidate. Don, of course, had been Member of Parliament for St. Michael East for the Barbados Labour Party between 1981 and 1986. He switched in circumstances that we don't have to go through now, sir. In 1986, he became the Democratic Labour Party candidate and was one of their trump cards in the 24-3 victory of the Democratic Labour Party, serving as that party's Member of Parliament for St. Michael East for those 5 years, 1986, 1991, but did not turn up at the nomination on nomination day, I believe it might have been St. Giles School, primary school, to be nominated as candidate in the 1991 election for the Democratic Labour Party. And rumor has it, sir, that in fact Johnny was called maybe about 2:30, nominations closing 3 o'clock, to try and find yourself at nomination facilities before 3, sir. Now, the Barbados Labour Party candidate in that election was Joey Harper, the late Joey Harper, sir, who has served this country well and who, in fact, is also a former president of the Barbados Council for the Disabled, sir. He would have been one of my early presidents. And as I said, rumor has it, and certainly Joey substantiated that Johnny may have reached the nomination station after the time when nominations ought to have closed, and that there was a position where the Barbados Labour Party could have challenged the nomination of Johnny, and therefore Joey would have won without a candidate. And Senior Minister, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, who has been around politics long, not as long as I have, is there agreeing with everything I'm saying. But that is fate, sir. That is fate. The point was not taken within the spirit of, I suppose, the, democracy and the two-party system that we have. And Johnny duly won in 1991 and became an elected member of this parliament on the government side. So he became a minister of government pretty late on in that term, in that shortened term of the Democratic Labour Party, which, of course, self-destructed and only had a term of three years, just over 3 years that time, 3 years, 8 months. And Johnny, in the wake of resignation of 3 cabinet ministers, ostensibly, but for other reasons too, I assume, over an appointment as CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the Barbados Tourist Authority, and the deputy, where the then Prime Minister, Honourable Lloyd Erskine Sandyford, remained adamant in his cause to appoint who he wanted to appoint, even going so far as to make himself Minister of Tourism and appointing who he wanted to appoint. And the resignation of 3 ministers, Johnny became a minister pretty, as I said, late in the term. He was only a minister, I believe, for a few months between 1993 and 1994, Minister of Transport and Public Works. And it is within that context that this Parliament and the public have heard that he would have been instrumental in getting the first bus for persons with disabilities in this country. As I said, sir, the Democratic Labour Party was on a path of self-destruction, and in 1994, the Barbados Labour Party, under the Right Honourable Owen Arthur, won. Johnny, however, though, retained his seat in 1994 in a 3-way fight with Jessica Odell of the Barbados Labour Party, the Honourable Member for St. Michael East, running for the NDP, National Democratic Party. Johnny retained his seat and therefore became an opposition member of Parliament. And, I used to enjoy, I had obviously recently met him within the context of the cause for disabilities in the early 1990s. And even though, of course, Johnny and I would have been on opposite political sides, I admired his style in Parliament, fighting against the odds, sir. I remember him, for example, when the Barbados Labour Party brought the amendment to the Constitution to forever make it unconstitutional for the salaries of public workers to be reduced, as the Democratic Labour Party had done in 1991-92 by reducing all public servants' salary, officers' salary by 8%, except judges, the Governor General, the DPP, the Auditor General, whose, as we know, sir, their terms and conditions are enshrined in the Constitution and cannot be adversely affected. Johnny, during that debate, made the comment that the Barbados Labour Party has brought this amendment to the Constitution to make the Dems look bad. And I laughed, sir. But that is the character of Johnny Trudeau, because as we have heard, his father was a top comedian. His father was a legend, sir. Obviously before my time, but I grew up hearing about this Johnny, Joseph Trudeau, Joe Trudeau, who was the top comedian and entertainer within that field in Barbados. And Johnny obviously inherited a lot of those traits from his father. And when you look at the pictures, in fact, I remember about 5 years ago or so when they featured Joe Trudeau in the newspaper, and they had a picture of him and Johnny side by side, striking resemblance between father and son. And I often say if I was good at science, I would have studied genes, because those kind of things enthrall me. But Johnny clearly was a tremendous salesman. Could sell himself as well as could sell vehicles. He represented St. Michael East for 2 terms, sir. He was also chairman. But before I say that, sir, after 1999 election, yes, Johnny changed political allegiance and supported the Barbados Labour Party, sir. And this, one of the issues behind that, he clearly realized that the Democratic Labour Party needed a stint in opposition for a while. He became, under the Barbados Labour Party, chairman of the Samuel Jackman Prescott Polytechnic, for which he's accredited with bringing online training to that institution, online education to that institution. He was also a member of the National Vocational Training Board during that time of Barbados Labour Party governance, sir. But the major roles and the role for which Johnny gained national honors, Silver Crown of Merit in 2020, was in the cause of advancing the rights of persons with disabilities. When I became a cabinet minister, Mr. Speaker, in 2018, I recommended and suggested to the National Council, to the Barbados Council for Disabilities, that Johnny should be put up for nomination for a national honor. He was so awarded in 2020, and he was extremely proud of that. He and I took pictures on Independence Day together, for instance, because I felt that any person who has served in the cause of advancing persons with disabilities, some of the most vulnerable group of people in this country, for 30-odd years at the time, as Johnny has done, is deserving of a national honor. He served variously as Vice President of the Council for the Disabled for years, as Secretary to the Council, as executive member on various committees, the Transport Committee that I was on, for instance, when Joey was president, Joey Harper, who I spoke about, was president of the association, and we were in negotiations with the Transport Board in terms of getting more buses for people with disabilities. Eventually, the amount was increased from 1 to 5 such buses, sir. And Johnny has been involved in so many issues relating to advancing the cause of persons with disabilities, of which I know of personally, sir, because he and I would have sat on the board as directors of council. I was on for the 5 years as an opposition MP until I became a government minister in 2018, when I obviously would have had to resign, sir, from being a director of the council. Sir, this is an opportunity, sir, to give credit to his second wife, Ms. Rosanna Truder, who is the administrative manager of that council for Council for the Disabled, because she would have joined with him and been his partner in this fight for all these years, sir, part and parcel, and obviously would have encouraged him in service for persons with disabilities. I also know his first wife, sir, Mrs. Patricia Brunton. She's a constituent of mine. His son, Jason, is also a constituent of mine. And Patricia, as well, is involved in public service. She sits on the body that advises the Prime Minister, recommends to the Prime Minister persons for judicial office. She's the civilian on that body. Johnny spoke on my political platform, both in 2013 and in 2018, sir, and was extremely happy to do so. And when I became Minister of Home Affairs, I would have taken to Cabinet, and Cabinet agreed for him to be chairman of the government industrial schools. And he was extremely passionate about that role. We started the reforms of that school. For instance, I would have, on recommendation from the advisory committee, released a lot of the girls and boys at that school. When I became minister, they had about 60 minors in the government industrial school. By the time I left, there were less than 20, sir, especially in terms of the girls, and we channeled them into the National Youth Corps, which regrettably, of course, would have been curtailed then with COVID coming on. But I want to salute Johnny for the role he played as my chairman of the government industrial school. He, as we've heard, sir, he also became an ordained minister of religion, sir, and we commend him from that, for that as well. But sir, I need to speak a bit too in terms of his transition to allegiance with this party, sir. And this speaks, sir, of the maturity of our politicians in this country, and still the civility, even though maybe we are on opposite sides of the fence. And long may this last, sir. Because of the fact that then Prime Minister, now Sir Lloyd Erskine Sandiford, opted to call a general election in 1994, September, when he had faced a no-confidence vote that year, in which he did not win. And he had the option either of stepping aside and someone else becoming Prime Minister, or call an election. He chose to call an election. And therefore, as I said, the Democratic Labour Party's term between 1991 and 1994 was short. By the time Johnny was defeated in the avalanche of seats by the Barbados Labour Party, the 26-2, in September 1999, he was just short of the period under the then rules, regulation, laws to obtain a gratuity and a pension. He was just short by a few days. There would have been two others who would have served between 1986 and 1994 who were also just short because of the early calling of that 1994 election. But the late Prime Minister, Right Honourable Owen Arthur, said, look, people have served This, and you know, sir, a lot of the public feel that people come to politics and it's a life of luxury and traveling and big drinks and all that. So we all in here know that isn't so, sir. There's hard work, there's sacrifice on the part of your families, your children if they're small, your finances. Many of us, and I'm sure Johnny as well, probably made more money professionally or in their careers outside before they became into politics than they make in politics, sir. And this contrary to what the public feel. And Owen said, look, someone who has served 2 terms, the out a few days, I think it might have been a week or less, I changed in the rules so that Johnny and these 2 others could get the pension and gratuity, sir. And that is something clearly is an admiration of the late Prime Minister, but also to the credit of Johnny. And I can tell you, sir, because, I mean, I knew Johnny well, you could appreciate he was extremely grateful for Owen doing that so that he could get a deserved pension and gratuity, sir. As I said, he became aligned to the Barbados Labour Party, and that was to his credit, sir. It brings me, sir, if you indulge me for a few more minutes, sir, to speak within that context of Johnny being, the rules being changed to make that adjustment so Johnny could get a deserved gratuity and pension, to speak on issues related to terms and conditions of parliamentarians, sir. I have a much shorter time in this parliament than I have had in the past, sir. This month will be 10 years, a whole decade I've been in this parliament. And I wish to take the opportunity to thank the Deputy Prime Minister, Honourable Member for St. Michael South East, and Minister of Housing, Honourable Member for St. George South, sir, who came into this parliament with me and as opposition MPs, who have been part, I think, all 3 of us, of each other's political development. But terms and conditions of parliamentarians, there's a fallacious view out there by a lot of the public that politicians get this big set of money, big set of salary. You know, they shouldn't get any gratuities, they shouldn't get any pension till they reach age 67. In fact, that should be increased. I hear some people saying they shouldn't get none till age 70, sir, not knowing that 10 years in politics, sir, as an elected member is like a lifetime in some other fields, sir. And I'm being serious, and I could speak with authority because, as I said, this month is 10 years for me. And I totally, and I believe it is our fault, sir. Our fault when I say our politicians, both political, on both sides of the political fence, for not explaining to the public the full gamut of what we are called to do. The full gamut, sir, on salaries that are compared to some other countries in the Caribbean, not commensurate, sir. That as a minister of government and a sitting MP, in my opinion, sir, you should be entitled to 2 salaries, but yet ministers of government who are MPs get the same salary as ministers of government who are in the Senate, who don't have a constituency. That the allowances we get, $2,500 a month, sir, well, let me speak for me, sir, that covers the expenses of my constituency office, sir. Plus the rent that is paid by government for your constituency office. In my case, sir, I add on to that because the rent I pay is more than what the government gives me. That has not changed for about 25 or 30 years. The amount, even though rents, of course, have gone up astronomically, property prices in this country, that MPs, you don't get any health insurance. Unlike in Trinidad, where the members of parliament get up to $200,000 a year in health insurance, paid for by parliament. You don't have, ministers don't have any drivers, sir, so you have to be fighting up in the traffic like everybody else. For instance, in the morning, when you may be going to make a speech at a big conference opening or whatever, and you should be thinking about what you're saying, you're fighting up in traffic, getting tense and pressured, sir. Whereas that is standard in many Caribbean countries, Trinidad, Guyana, Jamaica. In Jamaica, ministers of government have maids, gardeners, butlers, all of that, sir. In Guyana, Trinidad, they bring in duty-free cars, sir. Get cars on duty-free every 3-4 years in Trinidad. We don't have any of those terms and conditions, not one of them, sir. Even support staff in a situation where, unless you're a minister of government sitting in cabinet, you don't have a personal assistant. In Trinidad, you got about 4 employees, sir. There are rooms in Parliament, in the Trinidad Parliament, offices for members of Parliament, sir. Here, you got to be scotching up in somewhere, and if a minister has a meeting, you got to leave. So no place that you could meet or do research or whatever. These are things, sir, not for the benefit of the member of Parliament, but for the benefit of the people who we represent. And there's the point that I wish to make. It's not a personal benefit. It's for a personal assistant to every member of Parliament. Not a personal benefit. It helps with your representation of your constituency. And we don't have it in Barbados as they have it in other countries. In Trinidad, every member of Parliament given $50,000 every month that they could do what they want with in terms of employing people within the constituency, doing projects within the constituency. In other countries, and all of this is CARICOM, I'm not going outside. Bahamas, Jamaica, St. Lucia, members of Parliament given money which they have to account for every dollar, every year. It's audited, sir. They can't take it and put it in the pocket. They have to spend it on their constituency and show how it is so spent. We don't get any of that. So we have to be begging both, sir, for a road. Roads is the hot topic now. For roads to be repaired after 30 years. Thankfully, sir, and I told the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister this morning, Sign Hill Tenantry Road repaired, sir. I drove on it last night on my way home to check after 30 years, sir. But if members of Parliament given money as in other countries directly, you won't have to be begging about welfare and ministries and all that to the extent that we have to be doing. Sir, and I'm saying this, sir, because, as I said, this would make representation easier. And the public needs to be told that members of Parliament in Barbados, their members of Parliament, don't get anything at all from government for their constituents. You get an allowance, $2,550 a month. Like I said, in my case, it goes towards my constituency office. Everything you do in Trinidad, when your computer needs replacing, Parliament replaces it, sir. In Barbados, you got to replace it out of your own funds. So these are the terms of conditions. And I'm not here, as I said, trying to promote terms and conditions for members of Parliament. So it's for the people of Barbados, sir. And quite honestly, sir, where members of Parliament now abuse their positions, sir, there's no one in this house ahead of me who says, let them face the full force of corruption laws, anti-corruption legislation. And the Honourable Attorney General lay in Parliament this morning the Integrity in Public Life Bill, sir. I don't know, sir, where we got, why we get here, because we debated this, 4 years ago or 3 years ago, sir. But we back here because of the vagaries of the Senate, sir. Even though this Barbados Labour Party had all the seats, how our Constitution set up, a Senate can still defeat what is in here on an amendment to a Constitution, and so did. But I look forward to debating this renascent bill in Parliament very shortly, sir, because I fully feel, yes, members of Parliament should be adequately remunerated, sir. But if you're found with your hand in the pot, bribery, whatever, face the full force of the law, and like Singapore, put you away for life, sir. So let me balance it by saying that as well, sir. But it can't be the case where it appears to me that a lot of the public feel that members of Parliament, when they retire, should be walking about penniless, begging people for things. And I know, sir, I know that there are ministers who have served in the past, sir, who after they left politics, they're in the arms house, sir, the wives walking about begging people to buy products that they're selling, that kind of stuff, sir. Because we don't have a situation such as in Antigua, for instance, where every time the pension or gratuity of current members of Parliament serving rises, that the previous members of Parliament, ministers who are still alive, that their pension or gratuity increases as well, sir. And like I said, sir, I feel the opportunity. I've been looking for it for a while to make these points. As I said, someone who served now 10 years in here, who don't have as long in here as I've had in the past, sir. And to speak on that issue within the context of a situation where a prime minister had to change the present regime, legal or regulatory regime, so that Johnny, well-deserving, could have got some rewards for the rest of his life, sir.
I remember we have
for
2
what
more
he
minutes.
took. Yes, sir. So, sir, I again wish to, on behalf of the constituents of St. James North and my family and myself, sir, thank the respective relatives of the 3 individuals who we are paying tribute today, sir, and may they long rest in peace in the company of the Almighty. I thank you.
Honourable St. Lucie.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise today to make a brief contribution in paying tribute to 2 Barbadians, persons who have given of their life and their time in service to the people of this country in various ways. I want to begin, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I pay tribute to Reverend Dr. Joseph Johnny Onesimus Tudor III for his service to this country, his service as a family man, a minister of the government, a businessman, a community leader, a minister of the gospel of Christ. As I read the brief provided to us, Mr. Speaker, And when I attended a funeral service for the fallen comrade, I must say, we learned he was the father of 5 children, and in a day when, or at a time, perhaps when fathers are looked upon sometimes with a bitter scorn, or men are looked upon sometimes with a bitter scorn as not being the fathers that they ought to be. We have a good example today of what those fathers and persons like Reverend Tudor have done as a father. Mr. Speaker, his children, let me say, must have suffered quite a bit, because you know when you enter politics, all sorts of shots are fired at you. Your back has to be broad. You're accused of all sorts of things. And not just you, your children suffer as a result of that. I believe that Simone, Jason, Dominique, and Sherry and Joseph Jr. face similar circumstances. But today they can be proud of the contribution that their father has made to this country. His wife, here present with us today, would be also proud that a man stood in the gap for those less fortunate in terms of their abilities or inabilities at some point in time. He fought a case. He stood for their cause. And he also served, Mr. Speaker, as a member of Parliament. And I do remember quite well, as a student of politics, or one who followed politics closely from 1970s. And hence I joined this great party, the Barbados Labour Party, in 1980. I remember the date was the 17th of August, 1980. Because I felt the vision and that was enunciated by our leader, the late former Prime Minister GM Tom Adams, put this party in good stead in that sort of leadership, person that looked after the ordinary person and who had a progressive way of thinking and carrying Barbados forward, Mr. Speaker. And I was happy to be part of this organization. But the Honourable, or the late Johnny Tudor, he served, and I remember as I go back to those days in 1991, nomination day, and you heard the story told by the speaker, the Honourable Member for St. James North, just before me. And I listened to the fusion in that day, where all the commentary was, and there was great anticipation. It appeared that no one would have been contesting the seat for the Democratic Labour Party in the constituency of St. Michael East. And I was there praying quietly that it be so. Because I was happy to know what the Labour Party has suffered in 1986 general election. I know what it is to walk on the streets and people were asking you, what is the time now? And whether it was 4 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, everybody, especially those who support the other side, will look at their wrist and tell you 24-3. We were humiliated at the polls in the 1986 general election. And so I was hoping for some comeback, not necessarily that we would have won in 1991, but that we would have a saving grace, we would give a good account of ourselves. And if the fact that you didn't have a candidate for the Democratic Labour Party in St. Michael East could help us, I would have been happy for that. But I was disappointed, to be honest. When close to 3 o'clock or thereabout, a man called Joseph Onesimus Tudor III came into the school at St. Giles Boys School and presented nomination papers and ran for the Democratic Labour Party and won the seat too. But you know, Mr. Speaker, everything happens for a reason. During that time, he served his constituents well. He was elevated at a point in time to ministerial position. And we all know the politics, what took place in the political history, in the political life of the Democratic Labour Party leading up to 1994. But it was not just about politics, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Tudor was a man, his philanthropic work was legendary, and there's much things that he did for persons. And I believe there are some of us today, or all of us, if not most of us today, who fall into that category of working hard on the behalf of persons, assisting from time to time. But obviously you cannot get up and you cannot talk about that. Your life of service, because when you come into politics, your life must be a life of service. And I see students here from the school, the Combermere School, sir, in Waterford, and I will later on talk. I see the AG looking at me, but I will talk about the university.
I am also
on the
looking
hill.
at you, sir.
I will talk.
Remember, I'm the presiding officer. Remember that, please.
Certainly, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, but I will talk about the university on the hill in St. Peter at a point in time, too, Mr. Speaker. A university, of course it is appropriate, a university that has produced great leaders as well, Mr. Speaker. But the work of the late Johnny Tudor has been exemplary, looking out for his fellow man. And I must also add that my political success can be attributed as well, Mr. Speaker, to his work. You know, in politics, as you enter a campaign, and when the bell rings, all sorts of things have to happen. The campaign starts in earnest. Sometimes it is very short, quick, and you have to hit the ground running. And when you come from a rural constituency like mine, wonderful constituency of St. Lucie in the north, and you have speakers, you sometimes struggle to get speakers to come because, you know, as we say now in Barbados, and I don't know why we say that, it's too far, I ain't going all down there, and those are things. But Joseph Tudor, from the time the bell rang for the 2013 election, he gave me a call. I hardly knew the man, but he said, I come in to help you. And he presented himself almost every night to open the baton on the platform in St. Lucie. And in between there, he would give me some tips on what to do and how to canvass, where you need to go and make sure you do this and make sure you do that. That support was phenomenal because at least, of course, there were other persons in this in this party who were ever present from time to time during the course of that campaign. And my good friend from the Honourable AG from St. Joseph was always there as well. But he presented, yes, Honourable for St. Michael East. St. Michael, that area part of St. Michael, loves St. Lucie. But he contributed immensely to my success. In 2013, we went close, but we didn't make it. And he was back in 2018 to put the finishing touches on to ensure that this time that we made it to Parliament. And I am eternally grateful for that. I'm eternally grateful to his family for lending him to Barbados and to the people of St. Michael East, lending him to that he was able to form and work with the disabilities unit and make such a tremendous contribution to move forward. This was simply the measure of the man. Mr. Speaker, I want to quickly just say a few words about the former late Deputy Speaker of this Parliament, Ezra Ederson Aline. I never perhaps got the chance to really interact with him on a one-on-one basis. But, Mr. Speaker, I am pretty close to two of his sisters, one of whom I can see here today, his nephew, Carlos. And he was a very quiet, perhaps soft-spoken individual, but one who was very diligent in whatever he had to do, particularly in his law practice. A man with a brilliant mind. Mr. Speaker, as a youngster, I followed politics from an early age. And this is what used to happen. I would make sure every Sunday, whichever papers had in political columns, whether it was the Sunday Sun or the Weekend Nation on a Friday, and I would follow and read every political column. I would particularly read the columns written by persons like the late Sir James Tudor first. So I read the Democratic Labour Party columns first. So I want to hear what they had to say. Then I would go for columns by our good friend and comrade, former member for St. Michael North, Ronald Topping. He used to write too. You had Harold Hoyt, the late Harold Hoyt, who also wrote. And you also had a column written by a man whose name is Ezra Ederson Aline. So I would read all the political columns, the views on what was happening. Because when I was at school, at the university on the Hill in St. Peter, I used to argue politics hard. And perhaps then I didn't know that I would be so deeply involved to the point where I am now a member of Parliament for the constituency, but I just love politics and I just love debating. And, Mr. Speaker, men like Ezra Aline contributed immensely. And they didn't necessarily always take a political side, but they spoke as citizens of this country in ways that would have built the country, in ways that would educate youngsters. And I want to encourage all those young students here today, and all those who can hear me or will listen to this debate later, to ensure that you do a lot of reading as it relates to the systems and so the political system, politics, because people often form a conclusion about politics that politics is bad, it is not anything so good. But yet you have men like Ezra Aline who made a tremendous contribution, who got involved. So it is always interesting, and I'm advising that you read and follow your part. Sometimes you hear things, read and make sure you understand and ask questions. Because columns written by Ezra Ali educated me to some extent, and all the other persons you heard me mention before, plus others I didn't mention at all. It is good to be in service, or it is good to serve your country. And you don't necessarily, I'm not saying that you necessarily serve, you have to serve at the political level or as an MP, because I would tell you, sometimes this position, it is rough. It is difficult. When you look at it back then, and you figure that those members of parliament before, persons like Ezra Aline, persons like Johnny Tudor, you look at it and you figure that they had it rough, but times are different, so you cannot necessarily make a decision based on what is happening now. But you got to make up in your mind, if you're going to serve your country, you're going to serve your country and be prepared at times that it may be rough, it may be challenging, it may be difficult, but it is always good to serve your country. And I want to salute these two men today, Mr. Speaker, for all that they have done, the tremendous contributions that they have made. I want to thank their families for lending them to us. They have helped persons like me to fashion and to shape my life, a life which I have come to give service to my country, and I want to salute them today, and I want to thank you, your families, for lending them to us, lending them to Barbados. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish I could spread my discourse to include all three individuals today, but within the limits of time. And so much has been said before. I want to express my gratitude to the contribution made by Reverend Earwood over the years here. I also want to express my gratitude to Brother Ezra Allen. The reality is that I would love to be able to speak passionately and as deep as I can on the work of these two gentlemen in their different professions. But what I know is that they have made a positive contribution to the people of Barbados and the development in general. I will speak specifically for a few seconds to my comrade, my brother, my neighborhood man, Joseph Onesimus Tudor. And I can't say everything in these holy chambers because he was a human being and he would have experienced many things, some that he shared personally with me, and which the narrative cannot even be shared with another man or woman on earth, because he placed that confidence in me. Johnny came to Parliament in 1991. I was part of the team
that made sure he was here. I was also part of the team that made sure he was no longer here. And it's a very peculiar situation because here was a friend who came to Parliament in 1991. Then I had to take a stand 5 years after to make sure he was in Parliament no more. And that is a strange experience. But through it all, we never broke friendship. We were part of a political system in which there were two main political parties, and both Johnny and myself belonged to both. Only thing, the difference would be that I was not only a member of the BLP, but I was a member of the DLP, and I was a member of the NDP, and almost went to a fourth party. And I'm hearing now that I have plans to go for another one. But one of my brothers made the point today that the Barbados Labour Party's candidate in 1991, then also a member of the family of the St. Michael's East grouping, which was Joey Harper, and they indicated that Joey Harper would have won the seat if we had applied the rigidity of the rules and the laws of the land that was implied. But it would have been the worst thing that would ever happen to this country. At the moment when Johnny came, Johnny was the best man of the moment. I'm not going to make any assessment on whether he was BLP or DLP. He was the best man of the moment because he had shown an interest in the community. He was working in the community, and he had to make an adaptation to be shaped by the community and not the parliamentary representative shaping the people of the community. He could not be there, could not have been there if he did not accept that that community had the likes of Ramesses cattle before him and the likes of Donald Blackman before him. And he understood the mood of the people then. I don't think any other candidate fully understood it. It is a district of robust characters, clustered and Sandridge between Government House and the Bell Plantation. In our court, Johnny was perceived then as part of the gentry of pristine stock, just living off the northern side of the governor. And he was coming into a community who the people of that community were poor. The people of that community were struggling in order to survive. They were looking for someone to lift them up. They were not worried about whether he had 6 degrees, which institution he went to school at, how much money he had. You come to deliver to the people. And he understood that. And he recognized what his responsibilities were to the people of St. Michael's East. And it's because of that that when the nomination, we get past the nomination day, but when the nomination came up, I called Johnny. I was a member of the DLP then. I called Johnny in. He was driving in a car with Austin Seeley. And I told Johnny, Don had made a decision he would not run anymore. And we believe that you're the best man for the task. And Johnny rushed to MTW and asked, why me? And I remember Dr. Donald Blackman saying then, Johnny, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I am going to support you right through this general election. And therefore, we called the team together and the decision was made that Johnny will have the full backings of all the persons who rallied around Don Blackman on that occasion. And he rushed from there then to St. Giles School, where the Prime Minister of the day, Erskine Sandford, was waiting there having discussions about whether he was there on time, whether he was there late or not. No, the evidence, there's nobody with the evidence to determine whether he was there on time or not. Even if the moment was marginal, nobody can argue successfully that he got there late and therefore he became the candidate for St. Michael's because he was 15 minutes, 15 seconds late. I consider that to be trivial because then it meant that the officers who presided over the moment did not do justice. I can understand the passion for the Barbados Labour Party's candidate to be nominated and to face defeat, which he certainly would have, because he had no strong groundings. He born in the area, he grew up in the area, but he had no record of positive contribution to the community. I know that. So I'm saying that the people's decision was the correct decision. And if Johnny must be given credit from the moment that he became the candidate for St. Michael's East, all of that is based on gossip and not truth. And what I admire about him, he wasn't a pig-headed individual. There was no sign of arrogance. And I remember the first speech that I made on his behalf was at St. Giles Boys School. And I was there with David Thompson at the time. And David, when I spoke for Johnny, David said to me, the job that you have done has sealed it all. I can well go, I am going back home. And he said, you sure you have everything wrapped up? And I told him, yes. And I took, because Don did not participate in the campaign, although he gave his words, he did not participate in the campaign. And I took it along with others whose names I would not mention unless I had their approval. I took the campaign in St. Michael's East to the people for Johnny Shooter. And I do not regret one moment of that, because Johnny liked to listen. He had views. I can only describe him. I'm not going to put his contribution in any direct philosophical terms, but I would define it by saying he was a pragmatist. And what he felt the people need is what he delivered. I can remember one interesting thing about him, that when the Barbados Water Authority, whoever was responsible for the directive, marked red marks in the form of an X in front of all the houses in the Ivy housing area, Johnny spoke to me and he said to me, Trevor, this is not right. This is not right. He said, I am going to paint all of them out. This is disrespect for working class people because they were indebted to the state. He said, I'm going to do it myself. I'm not going to ask anybody to do it. This is the nature of the man. He went to the Ivy in a suit. I almost said a three-piece suit with cufflinks and bow tie. But he was a little more liberal than that. He had on an ordinary suit and a tie, black. And he actually squat, best word, to give you an idea. In those clothing with black paint and paint all the red marks out of the car park and the entire street, where the government officers and the minister did not take into consideration that what they were doing was humiliating ordinary people in the street. And those were indications of the manner in which Johnny Trudeau empathized with the people of that community. A man with a heart. You don't even have to hear what a man has to say, because there are men who talk one thing and do other things. Johnny was a doer. That is why I call him a pragmatist. I remember not only Johnny's interaction with the people in the streets and the ordinary people and some of the most vulnerable people in the area, but when he was Minister of Transport and Works, people felt that he did things without thought. I don't know why when people live in certain communities, even when their forms of social stratification, you get tarnished with the same brush, as though the community is made up of erratic, headless men. So we do all kinds of things that you don't. You know, Parliamentary Representative Ramesses Cattle at the time was perceived as a man who was so unorthodox. He, in my view, was also transformative, but people felt he was not the typical politician. They could not understand him. Don Blackman came thereafter. I don't know if it is because people believe that you come out of Nazareth, that you come from Carrington Village and the Ivy and the Pine and the Orleans and these communities, that nobody believes that you can do anything good. And there's nothing genuine about what you did. I say that as I reflect also on why Johnny became, it was a divine gift at the time when Johnny became the representative. Because I know what he did, the other person that people would have wished for, only because of the party in which they belonged to at this specific time. I know that he would have never done that, because he was very individualistic. He was not community-oriented. I don't like to put these things into debates of this kind, but I have to tell the truth. Johnny had a heart. If Johnny had a loaf of bread at home, even if his family object to it, Johnny would go and bring the bread and give somebody. And as rightfully indicated, he would go around. Even if he had no money, he would go around from place to place. I used to ask him, how you get this thing done? And he would come back with 20 hampers in a car and look for the most vulnerable people across the community and deliver the hampers to them. He didn't wait on Christmas Day. He didn't do it for somebody's birthday. He recognized the persistency of the poverty in the community, and he felt that he had a responsibility to mitigate the pressures of the society itself, and he brought that level of representation to the people of St. Michael's East. So don't poo-paw J.O. Trudeau. J.O. Trudeau made a major contribution. He did not, in a major way, contribute, like hopefully at a later date I will speak about. It is pragmatic. I will speak about that at a later date, because I really thought that today I would have had the opportunity to speak about Dr. Don Blackman. Because there's none that I have ever seen in my life that demonstrate true representation in the manner in which he did. And I am pleased to know that preceding me in my career was Johnny Trudeau. and was Don Blackman and Ramesses cattle. It is not a history that I can easily dismiss, and for people to talk about it that are grounded in ignorance. This community that Johnny represented saw the light of Conrad Reeves. Not a big fan of him, but it saw the light of Grantley Herbert Adams. The land on which he lived is still there. It saw the light of Duncan O'Neill, still in the Ivy. And we have seen the best of them. Not only talking about people of intellectual stuff, I'm also talking about working class men with muscle and language. That language that was colorful. I will speak about them at a later date. Johnny knew that environment. He wasn't, in the early days, I don't know of him on a nightly basis because sometimes men move in the cover of the night. But I don't know about him every day coming into the Ivy. But when he came, he understood the environment because he was a malleable character. He understood the environment and he tried to be part of that environment until he became a very integral part of the environment itself. So he can empathize. Representatives come and representatives go. And representatives enjoy the prestige of being MPs. And if representatives could wear crowns on their head, some of them will wear crowns on their heads. But Johnny was a worker. And that is why, and I must thank my brother as well for doing this work. That is why people who have been on the social peripheries of this society, like the disabled community, when a representative focuses his intentions of delivery on probably the most vulnerable, the group that has been alienated more than any other group in this country, you got a one leg, you're in trouble. If you got one eye, you're in trouble. If you can't see good and you're going glasses, you're in trouble. Because people talk as though these people do not exist. That was not Johnny Tudor. That was not Johnny Tudor. We've been struggling the last few years in here to get MTW to follow a smooth path of traveling through the central commercial market in Barbados, Bridgetown, and Swan Street. Nobody never even believed or thought that it was a necessity to have signage in town to facilitate the disabled people. Johnny focused on these things. Not a store ever built a door wide enough that a wheelchair could get through it. In this town, in this civilized environment, Johnny focused on these issues. I don't even believe they got 2 stores in town now with indoor bathrooms. That if a disabled person took the risk to go into the city, and nature demands that any store in town would have a door wide enough to facilitate, because they never thought that disabled people could carry out those natural functions. You know how hard it was to get signage to come from the hospital to the market? And you can imagine a representative deciding, look, let me deal with things that are less complex than that. And even presiding in these chambers and saying, But what has Chuda done? He has done service to this country that very few representatives in this parliament even thought about. Very few. They talk every day. I met that disabled community one day and said, but Prescott, could you really believe that the government has a national AIDS program, but nobody in the government believes that disabled people have sex? You imagine the disabled people raising that issue with me? And I said to myself, it's just because that people do not see disabled people as normal people, so therefore nobody has to pay any interest in what they do. If he had done one thing for civilization, and that thing was to focus on the concerns of the disabled community, he would have done more than many in this country. And I have to compliment him for that work that he has done, along with his wife and his family, because it was almost like a concern of the family. Not just working and doing his work in government, but also working with the NGO body that represents the disabled community in Barbados. And that was the nature of the man. And potholes, as a minister, it's common to all ministers. Some do not deliver as much as they should. He did his part. The other thing that he had done is that he felt that we had a national bus service. Most of it, people supported when it was fully nationalized. And when we decentralized the process, he felt that our people were not getting enough. Other people came here and formed a buffer team that were recipients of minibus license and a whole set of stuff. And even when he did that work, it was interpreted in a negative way. But the man's rationale for doing such was that we must decentralize the service and put that transport industry in the hands of ordinary working class Barbadians. That was his position. So don't believe that he had no justification for anything that he did simply because I say he's a pragmatist. He was a pragmatist with sense. Because some other pragmatists will come along and say, there's a man with X amount of millions of dollars, black people ain't got the money, and get all the minibuses to one specific social type in this country. He did not do that. Many, many, many owners of minibuses and taxis in this country, Johnny Chuda contributed to the opportunity to own something, to have an asset, to own property in this country. And that's why I say to him, to you, Honourable Speaker, and to all those within earshot who are privileged, whether being present or enjoying the benefits of the modern technology, I'm telling you, you cannot underestimate the contribution of Johnny Joseph Onesimus Chuda. Unfortunately, the game did not play itself out the best way that probably some people think it should have been played out. And I apologize to family members and others who felt that when I was thrust into the arena, many persons asked me, tell me I could not do it and I should not do it. I just had to do it because I think that the time was right for me to do it. And it was unfortunate when I walked through streets and Johnny come from one side of Skeets Road, and I come from the other side of the highway. We meet in the street. It was difficult because one had to go. One had to go, and it was a difficult period for me in my life because half of my colleagues were on one side. And when I'm talking about not just political colleagues, we live in the same community. The teams were broken up in the same community. The atmosphere became hostile unnecessarily, as far as I'm concerned, because he was beaten from the day, and I said yes. But I said, regrettably, it had to happen that way. But I want to thank Johnny, because I strongly believe that the Spirit lives on. I strongly believe that one way or the other, what I say, he understands. And that is whenever I do wrong to anybody, and I have a moment like this to say I did wrong, and I didn't do wrong to Johnny, but I know what I'm talking about. And I have the opportunity to say, I am sorry. I will say that I'm sorry because I'm not speaking to who is present. I'm speaking to the spirit of the individual. I would say, in my own way, this is a parliamentary representative to which I am proud to be associated with. And I believe that the people of St. Michael East will want me to say that. I can't say that for every parliamentary representative, including the ones who got there by accident. But I can say that for Johnny Joseph Shooter. And I want to close by saying, long live the spirit of Johnny Joseph Shooter. And we will forever remember his contribution to the development of the lives of the people of St. Michael's East. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that I am the subject, of course, to yourself. I am the last person on our slate who will speak in these obituaries today. Sir, it isn't often that we have the opportunity to speak in a public way to eulogize and to pay respect to individuals such as the three who are the subject of this morning's resolution. It is not lost on me either, and I have to echo the comments of my friend, that we have present with us a new generation of leaders, a new generation of Commonwealthians. And I know that there's no way that they or their teacher could have known that on this occasion we'll be paying respects to two stalwarts of a school that we hold.
Honourable Member, for your information, all three.
All three, that's
yes.
right. All three that we hold dear. I cannot think of a happier coincidence. We've done many obituaries, but, you know, sir, somebody would think if it wasn't the Deputy Prime Minister who was the leader of government business, that a cabal of Carmerians planned this happy coincidence. But perhaps, sir, perhaps, just perhaps it is possible for the significance of what we say about those who have left us to bear some mark in the young minds of our guests today. Perhaps they will listen and understand that a life of public service, whether through the church or through this place, is not about wealth and the accumulation of riches. Perhaps through these testimonies that we offer for our fallen comrades, they will get a sense that public duty is something that no society can thrive without. And I sincerely hope that among our guests today, that there might be one or two of them who would be willing to stand up and follow in the example of our fallen brothers. Mr. Speaker, on the occasion of the appointment of Thurgood Marshall to the United States Supreme Court, Martin Luther King sent him a telegram. And it is such a short telegram. And among the few words that he said are these, and I can't make it a document of the House, but I hope that I have your permission to quote. This was sent on the 13th of June, 1967. And Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "You have proved to be a giant of your profession, and your career has been one of the significant epochs of our time." You have proved to be a giant of your profession, and your career has been one of the significant epochs of our time. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that those words that Martin Luther King expressed in congratulation to Thurgood Marshall on his appointment are words that we could use today as we reflect on the memories of three great men who perhaps never thought of themselves in that way. But as we look back on how they have served this chamber, how they have served their individual constituents, how or wherever that constituency is constructed, that we would readily identify them as having been giants of the professions that they chose to follow, and that during the period that they served, that those periods represent significant periods in our national development. Mr. Speaker, I have few personal recollections of the goodly priest. It is almost odd, though, that he was appointed to be the chaplain for the lower house on the 1st of May, 1985. And that must mean that throughout my entire political career, except for when he stepped down, and for when he was in the Senate, that his ministry in this place must have touched me somehow. It's worth reflecting on the fact that maybe I might have been a worse parliamentarian if not for his calming and steady hand. But notwithstanding that his influence in the chamber might be of a different kind, the impact that he's left on every single parliamentarian to whom he has ministered, some of them publicly and others privately, I believe is well felt and appreciated. As for Joseph Onesimus Tudor, I can think of few more remarkable men. And perhaps his name, Onesimus, was probably a name that was meant to forecast that kind of future. For those of us who are understanding of things biblical, and I believe the only two of us are here, Onesimus was a slave who had left his master and gone to be with Paul. And Paul, driven by guilt, decided to send back Onesimus to his master, I think, Philemon. And we have the remarkable pun that this man may be as useful to you as he has been to me, but I don't want him unless I have your permission. And so Onesimus is, in essence, means useful or profitable. When we look at the life of Johnny Tudor as a parliamentarian in an urban constituency. Perhaps we can see how the name Onesimus is more than just a name, but descriptive of the value that his constituents had for him. I've had many opportunity to relate to him. Occasionally he would come to the Old Scholars reunion, and wherever Johnny Tudor was, you couldn't miss him because people gravitated around him as if he were the center of attraction. And we've always held him in the greatest of regard, and as a Commonwealthian, in his own way, he moved among the wealthy, and he moved among the poor, and he demonstrated to us all what a quality of life, what quality of life we should follow. As for Ezra Aline, Mr. Speaker, I knew about Ezra Aline long before I met him. I have a cousin who, when I went to visit him in Canada, he said to me, "So, do you know Ezra Aline?" And I said to him, "I don't know him, I know who he is." He said to me, "Well, Ezra and I went into Combermere together. And we used to call him Ezra Aline OTSA." So I said, that's a strange thing, OTSA? He said, yes, it meant on-the-spot advice. And I paid little attention to it then. But years later, I qualified as a lawyer, I practiced at the bar, and I discovered for myself why Combermerians of a generation past would refer to him as Ezra Aline OTSA. Because if you pass Ezra on the street, he will stop, and you and he will talk, and the OTSA becomes immediately evident because he had advice to offer you on the spot. Whether that flowed from his compendious knowledge of the law, or whether it flowed from his understanding of human nature and the political life, or perhaps the things that are a little deeper. Many of the discussions that Ezra and I had on the street had to do with the offshore business sector, of which he was a pioneer, and an area that I had hoped to get into. And those were how our interactions began. I never for 1 minute thought that I would follow a political path and become a politician. I never for 1 minute thought I might have become Attorney General. But as I have transitioned from a person who had only heard of Ezra Aline to a person who, in many respects, had important advice to offer me, sir, I have to say that his was a life that was impactful for me personally and impactful for many others. It would be wrong for me, sir, to delay the chamber much longer. I know that you have guests who you have invited to lunch. And I think that we have spent a sufficient amount of time today reflecting on the memories of people who have left a mark, an indelible mark, and on the lives of 3 individuals who we have come to love and cherish. The day may come, Mr. Speaker, when these encomiums may be offered about ourselves, if we are lucky and if we're deserving. But we can be sure that the 3 fallen soldiers whose memory we regale and respect today are individuals for whom, sir, this chamber has a huge debt of gratitude, and for whom the entire country of Barbados owes also a great debt of gratitude, and whose presence here on earth will be missed. With those few remarks, sir, I wish to join with all the rest of my colleagues in once more offering our deepest condolences to the memory and to the families of those three fine men, those three fine individuals.
I want to fully endorse all the comments that were made by the honorable speakers. And I ask humbly that we stand for 1 minute in silence.
Speaker, I beg to move that we do now suspend the chamber for a lunch break and that we resume at 2:45.
Second. The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 2:45 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 2:45 p.m.